Good morning, colleagues, or good afternoon for some of us already. And friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to EFI's scientific seminar or webinar, better to say, toward the next generation of forest monitoring, recent developments and policy needs. So I'm very glad that such a big number of participants has registered, and I believe that in these times when forest monitoring is very much at the forefront of many discussions in the scientific and the policy world, it's a very timely and adequate topic to be covered in our annual scientific seminar. Before we actually start, I would like to just present some housekeeping rules. So please, if you are participating as a participant, you are not able to actually unmute or show the video. Also, the panelists and the speakers, I would ask that you put the video on when you're speaking and otherwise being muted. And so any questions that you might have to the speakers or the panelists, please put them in writing to the question and answer box. I think there's a small icon that you can see on your screens in Zoom. And please, when stating a question, put your name, put your organization, so it will be easier for us to identify and then also to transmit your question. Keep the questions brief and to the point relevant for the purpose of this meeting. And be aware that we are recording this webinar and that recording of the webinar and also the presentations will be later available in EFI's website, in the website where the seminars program is currently also available. The webinar, it seems, is structured in such a way that we will try to bring both worlds together. So on one side, the experts, where they see what the challenges and opportunities are from global to the national perspective, and then also discussing what would be the possibilities to develop a harmonized European system. And then in the afternoon session, we will look more into the policy making side and their information needs and what data would they actually need to help them in policy making. So with no further ado, I would then suggest that we start with this webinar. And first of all, I would like to invite Marco Marchetti, who's a full professor of forest planning and conservation at the University of Molise in Italy. He has a long-standing and tremendous career in terms of research in land use, forest inventories, monitoring, management in Europe, in Africa, Latin America, and he's currently also our chair of the board. So Marco, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. Welcome to everybody. We are very happy to see so many participants in a crucial scientific seminar for the time being now in these years. First of all, I want to thank all the distinguished keynote speakers and guests for the panel sessions that we will have, and underline the importance of data and important data we need for policy making, to have an informed policy making. EFI has a long history on this. Probably somebody will remind or will remember this first volume where EFI was an actor together with JRC in 1995. It was the first of a long series of projects and seminars, conferences on the role of remote sensing. But always we have not separated technology from data. We know that it is very important to have suitable data for different purposes. Now, science and technology are quite advanced. We will have a very important overview of this in this seminar today, but we have to remember that we are always in the forest and looking at the forest. So we need to integrate several sources, several platforms, several other methods from forest, national forest inventories, local inventories to mapping and other procedures from remote sensing. So I think that it will be very useful for the next future. We have a European forest strategy that needs data. We have to front the challenge of the controversials in several ecosystem services. First of all, conservation versus production, but we know that we can have a sustainable forest management that meet all the ecosystem services, and that inventory, mapping, and remote sensing can help a lot on these sides. Also to monitor disturbances that are quite evolving and being more and more strong for in the future with the climate crisis. So I wish a very good and fruitful work, as the day of yesterday has been very fruitful and interesting. And I'm sure that all the speakers will be very, very clever in talking us what is the state of the art and where we can go in the next future. Thanks a lot and have a good seminar.
Thank you very much, Marco, for these words, and also for highlighting the importance of this topic and the seminar, and recording us a little bit also about the history, where all this already started quite some years ago. So then I would like to hand over to Margarida Tomé. She's a forest engineer and a professor at the Instituto Superior de Agronomía in the University of Lisbon, where she is teaching forest resource inventory, forest modeling, and forest management. And she will be the host for the first session. And so please, Margarida, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning to everyone. I'm very glad to be here to chair this important session. Previous colleagues have talked about the importance of forest monitoring, and I agree with them. It's a topic that is very, very relevant for today. We need to monitor our forests because our sustainable future depends on the sustainability of our forests, for sure. We have three keynotes, very well-known scientists, and I was advised to be strict on time because we have a very, very, very deep program to cope with. So I will immediately start the session, and our first speaker will be Peter Potapov. He's professor at the University of Maryland, but he is also the co-director of the Global Land Analysis and Discovery Lab. Peter, please. So you know you have 10 minutes to make your presentation, please.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me for this webinar, and good morning to everybody. I am Peter Potapov, a researcher from the GLAD Lab, University of Maryland, and I will talk about the application of moderate resolution optical satellite data for forest change assessment at national to global scale. In countries which are building their system for forest management, where institutional capacities and funding are not yet adequate to perform regular field-based national forest assessment, satellite data provide a great tool, and sometimes the only tool, that supports regular reporting of the forest area and forest area change. Our lab is working with a number of these countries, building their capacities to process satellite data and implement it for the forest management and monitoring. In other regions of the world, like in Europe, the situation is different. Here, the forest management is well developed. The NFI methods are mature and implemented for multiple decades. I will argue, however, that even in Europe, and especially on a larger scale, continental to global, the moderate resolution satellite data will still be helpful for a number of forest change assessment applications. The first applications I will talk about is the harmonization of national forest assessment reports when they integrated from the country to a large extent, like a continental or global. We know that countries use different methods for the NFI. We know that the definitions under the NFI systems also differ, which makes these reports only partially compatible. As satellite data give us a consistent, spatial temporally consistent time series of surface reflectance and land surface phenology data, and allow us to assess the forest extent and change for multiple decades. And I'm not talking here about any satellite data. I'm specifically talking about the data from the Lancet program. Lancet is unique. It's the oldest Earth research observation program that will celebrate its 50th anniversary since the launch of their first satellite next year. The Lancet allows us to look back in time and quantify the changes in forests for 10, 20, 30, 40 years for most areas in the globe. In a way, the Lancet is the closest thing to a time machine that we have and probably will ever have. Another application in near real-time forest monitoring. There is a number of tools that are developed by different teams. Our team developed a tool that's called GLAD Forest Loss Alert. This tool is working for tropical countries, and it provides national land managers, law enforcement agencies, and NGOs information about the most recent forest disturbance, supporting this work, their work to combat deforestation and illegal timber extraction. The recent paper in Nature Climate Change quantify a very high value of this program in terms of avoided deforestation and avoided carbon loss in Africa. So we can conclude that if someone is interested in reducing carbon emissions at the national scale by reducing deforestation and illegal timber extraction, application of such system that is based on the publicly available free of charge data from Lancet and Sentinel-2 is a great investment. And finally, I will talk about the most popular, most well-known application of the moderate resolution satellite data, creating continuous maps of forest stand variables by extrapolating the data that is usually collected in a discontinuous fashion from the NFI field plots and the LiDAR transects. The work was pioneered in Europe by Professor Erkki Tompo, and in many areas of the world, teams, including our research team, using a similar method. It's based on the application of machine learning tool, also known as a non-parametric classifier, to link between the independent variables that comes from the NFI or LiDAR and a set of dependent variables and a set of independent variables, which are the time series of the satellite data. Here is an example of our most recent project where we estimate the forest height and the changes of forest height for the last 20 years by extrapolating point-based sample of forest height from the space-borne LiDAR, JEDI, using Lancet Data Archive. And on the zoom-in example here, you probably can see the boundary between Finland and Russia, not only because the countries have different system of forest management, but also because of the differences in the average forest height of the mature forest stands. Now, we understand that we cannot directly retrieve most of the forest stand variables from the moderate resolution satellite data. In other words, we cannot see from the Landsat the forest biomass or timber volume or even forest height. We model these variables using empirical model, and the accuracy and precision of the result depends on the quality of the training data and the consistency of the time series of satellite data. To improve the consistency of the Lancet data, we developed a tool to process the entire Lancet archive into the set of analysis-ready data, which represent a 16-day clear sky normalized surface reflectance data set available globally for the last 20 years. This data set is spatially temporally consistent, allow us to extrapolate our models in space and time. And by the way, the product is available online for everybody to download and use, along with the tools for image processing and characterization. As I said, our most recent project is modeling forest height and its change over the past 20 years. It's integrated together with our forest disturbance, annual forest disturbance detection program project. And it's an update, an improvement comparing to the current version of the project that is distributed in particular through the Global Forest Watch website. We found that the forest height metrics is better represent carbon and biomass, forest biomass, and allow us to disaggregate disturbance dynamic in terms of the carbon emissions. It also allow us to quantify forest gain and plantation management. As a product is validated using set-aside JEDI validation data, and we can turn the height maps into the forest extent using common thresholds of 5 meters and taller. We can see that our estimated forest area is very similar to what recently was reported by FAO FRA by country and total. We see the same trend of the forest change. It's a decrease globally by 2.5%. But if we use the highest threshold of the forest to define the forest class, let's say 20 meters, we see that the taller forests disappear faster. And that's because a lot of a large area of the primary forest in tropics recently were converted into agroforestry and tree plantations. The product allows us to measure net and gross forest change globally, and also to look at the changes in driven by the disturbance. It's also allow us to estimate other variables, for example, the forest stand age for the stands that is 20 years or younger. I want to highlight one important difference between the NFI data and the satellite-based products. The NFI data is based on a field data that collected once. As soon as the data collected, processed, and published, we cannot go back in time and space and collect the data again. That can be a limitation. Let's say we have a paper published recently in Science by a group of Russian and European scientists that claimed that Russian forest, the carbon sequestration in forest increased dramatically. The paper is not only based on the NFI data that is not publicly available, probably will never be publicly available, but also recently published reports based on this data by Russian regions shows that in some regions their results are unreliable, and probably the NFI data has issues. However, using the NFI methods alone, we cannot prove or disprove this finding. The satellite data processing is different. We change source data, but the methods for data processing and characterization also change and improve over time. And over the last decade,
1 minute, Peter.
We have a great, thank you. We have a great improvement over the ways we can map forest and other land cover in terms of spatial resolution, map update frequency, and thematic details. And the last important thing that I want to highlight is that how we can understand which map is better, how we can make sure that we estimate the right quantity of the land cover area and land cover change. The good practice guidance suggests that we need to use stratified, we need to use statistical sampling every time we estimate the area of land cover classes and its change from the map. The wall-to-wall map support sampling through stratification. It's increase the sampling efficiency, and through regression estimator, reduce the uncertainty of the estimate. And the sample give us the idea of the map accuracy, allows map adjustment, and also allow to estimate area of other factors and other thematic detail that we cannot consistently map or see from the Lancet images. And on the last slide, I just want to remind you about the paper that was published by our team some time ago, where we use a very dense sample, 10,000 sample for Central Africa. And using this sample alone, we were able not only to estimate the area of forest change and its trend over time, but also to quantify the drivers of forest change for the entire region and by each country and sub-region. So I just want to highlight this importance of integration of wall-to-wall mapping and sampling for every time we work with a satellite-based forest assessment. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, for bringing us this very interesting presentation and also for summarizing what is good. It's remote sensing, like the possibility to have compatible and harmonized spatial data for large regions, near real-time information using publicly available and free of charge materials, and continuous mapping of forest stand variables, for instance. Now, I hope we have some questions. Robert, do we have some questions?
No, the Q&A box is still
empty?
Yes.
Yeah. So, if we have no questions, it's because...
There is now a question.
Good, great. 2 questions.
So there are 2 questions, and I would start with the second one by Vivian Quist, and she is asking, how do you address temporarily unstocked areas?
So temporary unstocked areas is impossible to address if we use biophysically based satellite forest monitoring. We see what is actually on the ground. We don't see the land use. So we cannot, unless we use a long time series and we know that the forest coming and going in the same area, we cannot say what's going on in the same, what is a precise land use for a certain area. Another question that was here is for the Son et al. Article. And first of all, we need to say that it's a different time interval. Here we're looking at from 82 to 2016. We are talking about the interval for year 2000 to 2020. The situation is very different in the recent years with increase of fires, especially in the boreal and the US. And so the changes of forest were recently reversed in many countries from the gain to loss, especially talking about Russia, Canada, and USA.
Okay, thank you, Peter, so much. Now we move to the next speaker. That will be Gherardo Chirici. He is professor in the University of Florence, and he teaches forest inventory and remote sensing. He's also the coordinator of a UFRU unit on forest inventory, and he is the coordinator of a recently started EFI network fund that is FINET. So, Gherardo, the floor is yours.
Hello, Margarita. Nice to see you again. And good morning to everybody. I go immediately to share my screen. Okay. Okay. First of all, just one word to show you where I am. I teach at University of Florence. That is the oldest University of Florence in Italy. We started in 1869. Okay, this year is this period is a very relevant because we just passed the first century of NFIs. We had a very nice meeting in Norway celebrating the anniversary of the first century. But let's say that the main new items, relatively new items in the last 20 years of development of NFIs is most probably the integration with remote sensing technologies. I just can recall some very relevant review papers. I know that this presentation is recorded, so you can go back if you don't know these papers because they are very, very good papers coming from Europe, USA, and Canada regarding the advancement of NFIs and the contribution of remote sensing to NFIs. So remote sensing is helping in traditional inventory estimates for more timely and more cost-efficient estimations. But more important is that through remote sensing, NFIs are able also to produce new products. So basically maps, so wall-to-wall spatial estimation. In the last years, we have very interesting approaches regarding the integration of multi-scale data, moving from remotely sensed data, so satellite data, down to high-resolution data, frequently also using UAV and ground plots. Here I recall just some of these very interesting papers. Of course, we don't have the time to go in the details, but the keyword is data assimilation and data integration, just to bring all the data together for more cost efficient, more precise, and more accurate forest estimation. In Europe and in USA and Canada, we already have very good examples of integration of remote sensing and NFIs to produce forest maps with estimations of quantitative variables such as growing stock, biomass. But new with the evolution of the so-called ecosystem services approaches, we know that now we are trying to estimate not just traditional forest NFI variables, but also new variables such as biodiversity or social benefits of forest, with the same approach, the integration of remote sensing and plot level. We have new opportunities from Earth observation. Here I try to recall the main one. So for sure, the increasing number of platforms. We have the new Sentinels satellites, the new Landsat 9. So we have a lot of traditional multispectral data available for more frequent acquisition. We have LiDAR data both from satellite, from the JEDI program, but also locally from terrestrial laser scanning, from UAV. We have an increasing number of spatial data sets released in Europe by the Copernicus infrastructure. We have the new generation of small satellites for real-time monitoring, such as the Planet platforms. We have new platforms for hyperspectral data, and we have new technologies for digital photogrammetry also through UAV. But most probably the most important game changer in this world is the possibility to use high performance computing, so in the cloud infrastructure. The most important infrastructure for the moment used by scientists in this area is the Google platform. More frequently, the Google Earth engine is nowadays one of the main platforms for elaborating very huge amount of data. These approaches were impossible when I started my PhD several years ago, unfortunately, but because we were able to download one single image and process on our own computer, so it was impossible to approach these global approaches through cloud computing. This is just an example. Peter already presented it, the integration of JEDI with Landsat to create, for example, a high resolution tree cover height globally. Another relevant data set is the so-called the Hansen et al. Work related to the forest cover change analysis that is also available at 30-meter resolution globally. This data set was very important, but the question from a European point of view, do we have to use Google and NASA product for monitoring European forests. Using global product also may bring to discussion in the scientific community. In this year, we had this very interesting, under my personal point of view, this interesting exchange of ideas regarding monitoring forest area in Europe and harvested forest area. You probably followed this on Science. So we have also more European oriented product for monitoring forest disturbances in Europe. Here I refer to the very interesting work of Cornelius and Rupert, Senf and Seidel. They used again a method that born in USA, Landtrend, and the Google Earth platform, but more specifically oriented to optimized for monitoring European forests. For example, we demonstrated in Italy that we need more specific approaches for monitoring forest disturbances, because in Italy we have forest coppices. So we need specific methods, because Landtrend and the global forest change maps are not accurate enough in Italy, for example. We have also new words, the digital twins. Probably you already heard this approach. Digital twins also have possible application in the forest area. We have one very important project funded by ESA regarding the application of digital twin Earth. So, as Margherita already introduced, I would like to introduce you this new project that was funded by EFI. I try to coordinate this very good team of researchers. Our idea is to stimulate the community, creating a connections and a discussion for proposing a possible solution for the integration of different existing data set for a European forest monitoring system. The first step is to bring all the actors together. So coming from FAO, Forest Europe, the European Environmental Agency with the new Forest Information System of Europe, the work of the JRC that was very active in the last 20 years for producing relevant information, the network of the National Forest Inventory, so ANFIN, and ICP Forest, the monitoring of the status of forests, and of course, in the framework of the Copernicus system. But in all these advancement and very relevant work, I just want to remember that we still don't have an official forest map of Europe. We have a lot of forest maps of Europe, but we still miss an official data related to NFI statistics. We have a very good examples in more or less all the countries in Europe, but we don't have a European map. So take-home messages, and I've finished. One relevant topic is the accessibility to NFI data. We have an ongoing discussion. I hope that in the future we will have new possibilities for accessing more easily to NFIs. A multi-scale approach with LiDAR data and satellite data. We would like to remember the very good example of our Canadian friends. Canada has a similar dimension of Europe, so a possible large-scale approaches can be come also from Canada ideas. New technologies, the digital twins, urgent need for a reference, EU LiDAR dataset. We have too many LiDAR datasets sparse around Europe. It is very difficult to have a idea of the LiDAR availability. We need, I think, a EU LiDAR dataset. We need a European forest type map. It's 20 years that we are discussing about that, but I think it's time to produce it. And we need an integrated approach to bring all the stakeholders and the scientists together. So if you are interested, you are very welcome to join the EFINET network for talking about these items. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gherardo, and thank you for your interesting presentation. And also to remember that NFI started in Europe 100 years ago. In the beginning, they were very different from what is happening nowadays, and you told us the story of the evolution of forest inventories, national forest inventories. And now I hope we will have some question and answers. We still do not have none, but I hope they will come soon. Yes. Robert, do you want to make the questions?
I can make the question. It's from Vivian, and she's commenting in relation to the National Forest Inventories and open access, that what is needed to acknowledge the balance between the good statistical guidelines and the value of private data versus public needs. This will need to be handled.
Yes, I agree. I think that it is very important to consider NFI as partners of the scientific activity. We don't have to consider NFIs just as data provider. This makes the cooperation not so easy. I think it's much easier to consider the NFI community within the framework of the scientists and the work that we can do together. We don't need to create teams or remote sensing community against someone else. We need to work together in Europe.
Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so we can thank again and we can move to the last keynote that will be given by Peter Surovy. He is professor in the Czech University of Life Sciences, and at the moment he is the head of the Department of Forest Management, and his research is mainly on remote sensing for forestry applications, but I know very well that he also does some research on forest modeling. Peter, please.
Yes, thank you, Margherita, very much. And thank you for this opportunity to have this presentation. I hope you can see my screen. I will speak about the topic which is about Czech Republic forest monitoring, which is the reason why it is presented here, because Czech Republic was supposed to be the host, and it is the virtual host of this conference. So we took the liberty to present how the forest monitoring is working here. And as I also touch a little bit about the history here, so I invited my good friend from Forest Management Institute, one of the vice directors, Mr. Kubishta, who helped me to elaborate this information, which I'm going to show you. So I will briefly speak about a little bit about the forests in Czech Republic. How was the history when it all started? It is actually what you, Margherita, just mentioned. When did we start to monitor forest? How the national forest inventory is executed, and what is the technology and future perspective? And I will keep it hopefully within 10 minutes. So this is Czech Republic extension, and on the right side you see the approximate forest types. So the dominant coniferous, mixed forests, and dominant broadleaves. And for those who are familiar with the morphology, so the coniferous are mostly on the mountain areas, and these lowlands where are the larger rivers are usually covered with the dominant broadleaf forest. How the forests look like? So this is a national park view with these mountain coniferous mostly coniferous forests. Then something which is called historical Czech forest, so in the midlands, mixed forests and broadleaves, and finally, of course, the abundant water stands where you have a lot of water-friendly species. So what was the history when it all started? And Margarita said it was 100 years ago. So it was a little bit here. The first, we consider the dates a little bit even earlier. And the first historical note about someone started to worry about forest mensuration is in 1355. It was Charles IV, the king of Czech Kingdom, who issued this law. And the law included the protection of the beauty of the Czech forest. So he was interested in this, how much of the forest exists in his lands. However, this law was never became valid because of some opposition, of course, from noble people. But the first valid law which we consider in our territory is Constitutio Maximiliana from 1565. And there was a clear order. A part of how to manage the forest, there was a clear order to measure forest. So it is maybe more than 500 years or 400 years when we measure forest. Then the inventories were carried mostly locally by the stakeholders and counties. Since global approach was Maria Theresa, the queen, this was the times of kings and queens. She issued the so-called forest orders, and the summaries are since then monitored. In 1855, we call this the period of industry and becoming republic. There we have a start of statistical sampling. So this was usually done by some forest services, differentiated for different parts of the republic. And in 1920 is considered one of the first, let's say, summary of how many forests are there. This is the output. And the evolution came to the end of the Second War. And after the Second War, we have the first so-called forest inventory. I just have to remind that this is not what we consider now National Forest Inventory, because this was done based on the forest management plans. So it is something like a plan for a cadastre parts, and each part is measured and evaluated, and the summary of all this was considered to be the first so-called inventory, and it was in 1950. And then it was repeated every 10 years with permanent or continuous inventories until approximately 1990, when there was a revolution time. And after the revolution, we came to what we know now as a National Forest Inventory. So the National Forest Inventory was, and it is slightly or in a sense agreed with the neighboring countries, and it tried to be harmonized all over Europe. It's not perfect, but it's somewhat, there is an approach to be harmonized. So our first inventory started 2001, and again 10 years later, and there is one more planned as a fourth one. In each one, there is a higher approach of remote sensing data. I will not go into detail of the forest inventory. This is a common knowledge for most of you, hopefully. So I will speak about the before last point, which is the technology itself. So as I said, in the times of the king, everything started with the questionnaires. So it was more like reports, word reports about how the forest looked like. Later, there were developed, of course, some tools, and these tools led to the main technology, kind of technology which was used as statistical mathematics. So it means that we started to extrapolate and interpolate and do calculating things forward and backwards until remote sensing appeared, as we could call it, another breakthrough methods. So what was the breakthrough methods? It was also mentioned by Gherardo that NFI1 used this remote sensing technology as to distinguish forest and non-forest land. Okay, so the plots which were planned were evaluated by imagery. It is in the forest or it is not in the forest. Second inventory already collected more from the remote sensed imagery, from additional plots like canopy cover and so on and so on. And finally, 2 years ago, I am rather proud to present that this is a map purely based on remote sensed data. This is a biomass or wood stock estimation for individual parts of Czech Republic, and the reported error is there like approximately 2 to 3%. And it is based on remote sense data from the airplane, because it utilizes normalized digital surface model with information about species and species classification, and this digital surface that gives the height, and using the aerial-based approach, a famous approach, we can calculate the amount of wood and the stock of the forests over the whole Czech Republic. So this is a very high-tech product available. Among other available products which you can find in Czech Republic, there is another satellite-based product nationwide. It is called Kurovcová mapa. This is a bark beetle map. But this bark beetle map, apart, you can see some sample here. This bark beetle map, apart of showing the dead trees, also is able to estimate the clear cuts. So it also gives the information to forest services or to ministry how much of the area is affected by bark beetle and how much of the area was, for example, removed. And also it is considered rather a reliable source of data. Another map which is produced not on satellites but on aerial imagery, not laser, but imagery, as through the SFM methods also mentioned by Gherardo, is harvest detection and the normalized digital surface model. So also every 2 years, the Czech Republic is covered with the aerial scans, and from these aerial scans from the airplane is calculated the harvest detection. So there is an information about the whole Republic, how much of the area was clear-cutted. Then 3 more maps publicly available in this country are forest health status, which is based on the NDVI from the satellites, growth status, or it could be a height class. So this is estimation from the NDSM, so how high is the canopy over the ground. And finally, forest species map, which is also satellite-based information. So all technologies are available for the owners, and people can have information from satellites, airplanes, drones, and terrestrial measurements. Maybe this is a technological slide. So if we search for harmonization around Europe, probably we have to find also utilization for all these techniques. I would only mention one extra one, which I see as a big variation in Europe. This is an ultralight airplane. Ultralight airplanes are planes, small planes, which are rather dangerous for flying.
1 minute, Peter.
But thank you. But they consume a very low amount of energy, and they can cover small territories, which is in contrast to large airplanes, which only can fly for a large territory. These small planes can cover small territories, let's say up to 1,000 hectares. Okay, so future perspective. We monitor forests for many years, and there are different products available in Czech Republic. I wrote here that owners are familiar with certain amount of technology because some of them know the satellites but have no idea about drones. Some of them know drones, no idea about aerial imagery and so on. The most important information which we need for growth can be done by repeated monitoring, the age, because we know the start of clear cut, and for better and more precise information, of course, we can use more information for the better and more stable forest. Though legislation changes are required also here. And that is all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter, for bringing us this interesting presentation about the evolution of forest inventory in the Czech Republic. And I don't know, while we wait for some questions in the query and answers, we have a question in the chat. I don't know if I can use it, Robert.
Mm-hmm.
So it's from Ignacio Martinez, and I will read a little bit. He's mentioning that the comparison that I think it was Gherardo that made a comparison with Canada. And then he mentions that size is similar, but population is not. So he's bringing the importance of stakeholders. And he mentions that except for some regions, we have foresters in the field, a lot of people under almost every tree. And we also have many different forest authorities and ownership structures. And the question is, what does this difference makes for remote sensing and monitoring approaches? And is directed to all the three panelists. So maybe someone wants to answer to this question.
So if no one else, I can answer. Of course, more people we have better because we can collect more data. It is also related to problems like forest fires. So you have more people, you have higher chances of starting a fire, but you have also much higher chances to stop it because someone will notice it earlier. So for the forest monitoring, I would say we can expect that more people is a source of potential more data and more calibration data, let's say.
Okay, and I can add just a comment. We have all the presentations have focused mainly large-scale inventories, and I think that Inácio was talking about low-scale inventories to support forest management. And in many regions in Europe, we have very small properties and no forest inventory at all to support forest management. And I think we need also to work on that low-scale information. That's my opinion. And we have now one question and answer from Chris. I think it's for Peter. How do you ensure the statistical sampling of the forest represent the whole forest population? Do you change the sampling area time to time?
Yes, that's a good question. Of course, statistics is always based on probabilities. So if you really want to have 100%, we need to measure 100%. But of course, the sampling area is basically increasing. Yes, as we have better techniques, we have better, more precise GPS positioning, GNSS positioning. So, and we have better equipment to faster measure the calibration sites, then we can increase it. And of course, put it simple, more ground truth data, better the results, better the reliability of outputs. I think there is one more question in the chat. Johannes.
It's from Vivian. And thank you, Vivian, for being so active in putting questions. Can you answer, Peter? Peter or any one of the other speakers, because she's talking about open access of NFI plots and how it relates with its use. Do anyone want to answer, Peter or any of? Or
I want to say, if I may, a few words about that. Europe give us a great examples of data sharing. Some countries in Europe have the open NFI data, like Sweden, and Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and some of the Baltic countries like Estonia provides a LiDAR data for everybody to use. And in general, the Copernicus maps of a great quality available for the entire continent. I think that's a great example, it's a probably unique example in the world, how the data from different countries can be shared for the global benefit and for the transparency of the forest estimation and change measurements. The problem of the NFI data sharing, I understand that it's a big problem with the privacy concern and the private property, but without open access to the NFI plots, the global progress towards the transparent forest monitoring will be stuck. Another comment, just short one, is about the Canadian model. Canada has a great system for forest monitoring, but Canada never release their maps or NFI plots or even LiDAR observations. So we can trust their publications, but we cannot check them. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And now we have a question from Harald Mauser, and he is mentioning the fact that bigger private forest enterprises, and some state forests, they do their own regular forest monitoring for elaborating the forest management plans, and this information is very important. And he thinks that this information should also be included in the forest inventory and monitoring methods. So this relates a little bit with free access to national forest inventories, because having free access to private forest enterprises information is even more complicated. But I don't know if anyone wants to comment. No? It was an important comment, but as we don't have any reply, I think that I can give the word to Robert Mafsar. Before doing that, I want to thank again to all the three speakers for these very, very interesting presentations, and also for the interesting discussion that we had afterwards. And as someone mentioned yesterday, we miss a coffee break to have more people, person-to-person discussions that are usually as important as the ones we have in the meeting, but we hope that very soon we will be able to have them. Robert.
Thank you, Margarita, very much for the excellent moderation, for managing to look at the chat, at the questions and answers box, and for especially keeping the time. Like you said, the program is very dense.
Yeah.
But I very much like that the discussion already started before we actually had the panel discussion. And I think that also some of the questions that were highlighted here will certainly be also addressed by the panelists.
Yeah.
So if you now would then allow me, and I would invite now the panelists to switch on their cameras to make themselves visible. I would like to first introduce who is today in the panel. So I would first want to present Anne-Marie Wastur-Birk. She is the forest expert and she works at the European Environmental Agency, where she's currently managing the Forest Information System for Europe, so to speak, FISE. Then we have with us Raisa Mäkipää. I hope I pronounced it well. She's a research professor at the National Resource Institute in Finland, better known as LUKE. And she has a wide expertise in ecosystem modeling, carbon and nutrient cycling, biodiversity, ecosystem processes. And then I would also like to greet Alessandro or introduce Alessandro Cescati. He is the senior scientist at the bioeconomy unit of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. He mainly focuses on the quantification of biological and biogeochemical processes that occur in land climate systems at various spatial and temporal scales. Then we have also with us Ruben Balbuena. He's a lecturer in the Forest Science Department of Bangor University in the UK. His current research focus is devoted to using forest information for providing value to environmental assets, mainly using remote sensing data with great potential for analyzing structural and morphological traits. And finally, we have also with us Johannes Breidenbach. He is a research professor with the Norwegian National Forest Inventory, where he coordinates the development of the forest resource map. And he is also responsible for Norway's reporting to the LULUCF area and living biomass estimates, including under the UNFCCC process. And so I hope that everybody can see the colleagues, because obviously I have the wrong view on, and now I think it's a little bit better. Yes, now I can see you all. And since the last one that I introduced was Johannes, and because we started already with the national forest inventories, and you are responsible for at least part of it in Norway, I was going to ask you, hearing all these discussions now about the new technologies that are available and the need for integrating data, where would you see that for national forest inventories that are certainly rich, but also quite diverse when it comes to data collection, how might they develop in the future? And also then a little bit, if you could also reflect on what was already mentioned in the chat, is on the, of course, whether this data or non-national forest inventories could form the basis for a more European harmonized system, and under what conditions, I would say. Sorry for a complex question. I'm sure the answer will be even more complex.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Robert, for the nice introduction and the opportunity to share some thoughts here with this interesting crowd and the great presentations here. Maybe before going to these questions, I want to say a few words about NFIs, what they are. The National Forest Inventories, they're forest surveys, and we can think of them as an opinion poll among trees, right? Our field crews go out there and ask, how big are you? Actually, we don't ask, we just measure the trees. And from that, we can estimate parameters of the whole forest population of a nation or a part of a nation. And this is about variables, several hundred variables are often estimated from these NFI data. So it's not only about biomass, it's also about biodiversity and things like that. And almost all EU countries conduct these NFIs, and the survey designs differ a lot from country to country. But there are more than 500,000 field plots out there, and many of them are repeatedly measured. But as for any other data, there's specific expertise needed to use them correctly. And the key to using those data is actually a cooperation with those that gather the information. And when it comes to the question how we think the NFIs will develop in the future, I think I'd like to mention at least 3 major developments, although there are certainly more. So first, I think we're gonna see a much stronger integration of remote sensing and field data. And I think the example from the Czech Republic is very nice, is a nice example for that. So many NFIs have already or provide already a very high resolution forest resource maps with nationwide coverage. So, and especially the availability of airborne LiDAR and image matching made that development possible. But of course, also the sentinels from ESA's Copernicus program are very useful because of their temporal resolution. So for mapping changes or for tree species mapping, for example. So these forest maps and will be even more used to reduce the uncertainty of NFI estimates. And this integration of remotely sensed data will enable NFIs to provide also reliable estimates for very small areas, as Margarita said, maybe even down to the stand level. Many forest maps already provide that information. And not only for regions or nations as it was done traditionally. So second, I see so there's advanced field equipment such as terrestrial LiDAR scanners and things like that. They become even more robust and lightweight in the future. And NFIs will use them to create these digital twins of the forest. And this will further increase the transparency of measurements that allows, and it allows measurements that have not been possible before. And third, NFIs will even more provide data for answering pan-European questions. So that includes estimates for regions which span across country borders, for example, the Alps or the Mediterranean, but also the whole EU level. This is certainly a development that we already see. So this would then, for example, also allow a consistent European LULUCF greenhouse gas inventory. But of course, that requires a lot of harmonization and partly also standardization of national measurement protocols. So the European NFIs are organized in the European National Forest Inventory Network, NFIN, which was shortly mentioned by Gherardo already, to establish just this harmonization and a better availability also of the NFI data. So together with JRC, a lot of methods have already been harmonized in the NFIs. However, the funding for that to create a real harmonized European forest monitoring system has been very limited so far. And that in a way brings me to your second question. So would the NFIs form the basis of such a harmonized forest monitoring system? And the short answer to that is yes. The NFI group has the ambition to develop such a system. But it requires a European commitment to establish and none the least also fund such a system. And we need to keep in mind that the NFIs are nationally funded, and the NFIN harmonization efforts were possible only due to smaller projects or research funding, which is of course not sufficient in the long run. When it comes to your second question, we heard that actually, or second part of that question regarding the under which conditions the NFI data could become more openly accessible was also mentioned by Gherardo. And I think there are certain things to remember here. So the NFI data are publicly available with a few limitations. And so two of the most important limitations here are, so these data are complex survey design data or result from complex survey designs. And there's a lot of expertise needed to use them correctly. So therefore, NFIs often are a bit reluctant to just publish or openly give all the plots away, because there may be a wrong usage of this data that is very difficult then to correct later on after it has been published, maybe in a big journal. And second, the coordinates of the sample plots that are required to use them in remote sensing applications are often not provided. And there are good reasons for that. For example, if you think about the analogy to opinion polls, and if we wouldn't guarantee anonymity to people when asking them, then you might get wrong questions. And that's a little bit the same in the forest also. You need to make sure that these plots are treated the same as the normal forest around it. And if the plot coordinates are available, this cannot be guaranteed. And it's very hard to find out if the plots have been treated the same way as other forests. However, there is a solution to these limitations, and that is simply cooperations with the NFIs and NFIN. And NFIs are usually very open to actually share their data in general, as long as their data system is not corrupted by that sharing.
Thank you, Hannes, very much for this very comprehensive and very good explanation. I think it also clarifies some of the things that were mentioned in the chat before. And although I would be now very, very tempted to give over to Alessandro, I will still not do that, just to a little bit still explore also with others. But I will now maybe go first to Raisa, because we were hearing about the development of the national forest inventories and also the needs to employ new methods and look at new perspectives. And I think that your specialty is on the forest soil health monitoring. Can you a little bit explain us why is this important? I know that now some people think what a stupid question, but maybe some of us are not such specialists on that. And also then, how is it currently treated, or whether at all, in national forest inventories or any other established monitoring systems?
Yeah, so it's easy to answer on question why soil is important and why it's important to survey forest soils. Forest soil conditions, they directly affect human well-being and ecosystem functioning. I mean that forest growth and provision of the timber and other ecosystem services are dependent on forest soil conditions. Like fertility, moisture, water retention capacity, and so on and so on. And one timely example is that soils are also significant. The soils significantly contribute on forest carbon sinks and sources. And I want to underline that there may be a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions from soils, while trees are carbon sinks. So they we have to understand what happens in the soil to be able to follow what is the role of forest in climate change mitigation. Without information and understanding on soil processes, we cannot do that. On the other hand, it might be so that at the same time, when we have a carbon sink in vegetation and trees, there is also a carbon sink in soil and deadwood carbon pool. But we need information, we need measurements of that. And due to this high importance of soil to human well-being and provision of the raw materials and mitigation of climate change and other ecosystem services, we certainly need to monitor soil conditions and soil greenhouse gas balances. And we are not starting from 0 point, not at all. It was earlier mentioned that some national inventories, forest inventories, they include soil surveys. In addition, EU has started European-wide soil survey, LUCAS, and put resources on that. There is thousands of soil survey plots across Europe, which are sampled, and soil samples are analyzed. However, there is a major problem in that, and it's partly waste of resources because they are not coordinated with national forest inventories. They are not integrated to national forest surveys or agricultural surveys. And this means that we have information about soil, but we don't have information on vegetation and trees and site properties from the same site. They are independent. And the network of LUCAS plots, it's not optimized. It's nice that they cover both agricultural soils and forest soils, but this lack of integration to national forest surveys, it's really waste of resources. And this should be changed in national scale and at European scale, because LUCAS is coordinated at European scale. So I would conclude that knowledge gaps on soil processes and lack of harmonized soil monitoring limit ability of the EU to maintain soil-related ecosystem services, and it limits EU to reach climate policy targets of the LULUCF sector. So that's, I will stop here.
Okay. Thank you very much for this, and thank you also. I'm sorry for my initial innocent question, but now before then, I would still maybe ask Ruben, because there was one question already before that was for Peter. Actually, you are specialized in remote sensing data and use of this data for producing maps or whatever other information can be produced from them. So they are in some cases new tool, in some other cases not so new. So where do you see that their main use is at the European level to produce this harmonized data, and also where the limitations are? They were, for example, give us the question about temporal inconsistencies of satellite data. Can you a little bit elaborate?
Well, for that, what we need is more accessibility to data. That is something that we can obviously think. If we had more public availability to data, we could check that information more. Since it's a panel, I think quite straight. I've been liking a lot what Johannes has been saying, but I can already say that I disagree with the idea that the data shouldn't be open because of the lack of expertise in the people using it. There are groups out there saying that some forests are being harvested in Europe, and that the information that is being given is not true. We cannot say that they cannot have the data because we are saving them from themselves. You know, we should rather put the data on the table and say, let's have a look at what is true and what is not. And even this whole thing that has happened last year with the concerns of the increase in European harvest, one could very well argue that if the data would have been more open, that discussion wouldn't have happened. It would have been a lot easier for all us to know whether that is true or not. If we all would have the data on the table, we will see who has the best expertise to look at it. So I don't think that is a good argument, but I do see that it is true that there are limitations to public availability of the data, and many of these limitations are perfectly legitimate. There are several ways out of that. One is selective availability of, for example, in Sweden, for example, permanent plots don't have availability of the location data, but the rest of the plots, and that's the big bulk, they do have. So that is one possibility, one way out that we could, a good example that we could apply to the whole of Europe. There are other possibilities. One is openness in the tools. So as Johannes has been saying, if we want to give the data, we need expertise in the use of that data. So we can be open. If we cannot be totally open on the data, we can be open on the tools that can be applied to that data. For some tools for extracting information from that data, tools that can enable to link that data to remote sensing. One thing is that is clear, these products that Peter Potapov and Gherardo Chirici have been showing, I think that one thing, the one change that has happened in the last 10 years that has enabled these tools, these products, these remote sensing products, has been the openness of the remote sensing data. When I started with this, it was very difficult to get hold of one or few Landsat images, and nowadays everything is available for all us in there, and that makes a real change. And I think that is what we need. For forest data as well. Vivian has also been in the questions saying about and many other people has been saying about the questions of privacy. I think we could consider the fact that there is, I think forest data in a sense is already in a lower league in data privacy compared to the openness of LiDAR data, satellite data. We can all see, and even Google Earth, Google Street View. I think we can realize that there is so much LiDAR data that is telling a lot about the forest out there. And that is already breaking the privacy of forest owners a lot more than actually the measuring of trees. So we need to move on with this new change of paradigm, let's say. And then just answering your second question of the remote sensing tools, I will just summarize. We have already two tools that are operational. One is satellite images. NFI in Finland has been based on satellite images already from the 90s. Then there is LiDAR, and in Sweden from 2013 there is already a nationwide NFI in Sweden based on LiDAR, and nowadays in many other Nordic countries and in Central Europe too. And then in the future, we also will have satellite LiDAR, radar, and terrestrial laser scanning. But what I think is that this that is already operational in many countries, which is satellite and LiDAR based, we need it for the whole of Europe very soon. So yeah, that's all from me. I see that Vivian is maybe answering what I said because I was alluding to her. I can have a look.
Thank you, Ruben, for now. And you can look at the question maybe in the meantime. And I would now like to go over to Alessandro because there was a lot of about collaboration, about misinterpretation, about national forest inventories, use of remote sensing. And we see also that the new EU forest strategy is talking a lot about EU monitoring system and establishing a system like that. So what are actually your plans, and where do you see the biggest troubles that you are dealing with?
And thank you, Robert, for the relevant question. In terms of challenges, we certainly have several ahead of us. But I would say that the very first one that comes to my mind is really the ability to achieve a fully harmonized ecosystem system that works wall to wall for the entire Europe, which is what we're actually missing at the moment. This is really a challenge, because if you think this system has to cover a multitude of biomes, forest types, management systems, the national specific definition about what is a forest and what is not. So it's a real challenge, but it's a fundamental problem we have. I think for us as JRC, and I think also for the Commission in general, this is the most important aspect, because all the challenges that we have ahead of us in terms of the management, sustainable management of forestry and all the related aspects, really requires a full European perspective on forest health and forest resources that only such a system can provide. Of course, there are other challenges behind this. And for instance, another one I see is that this system should become, in a way, more able to cover from the beginning the multifunctionality of forest. So to go beyond just, let's say, an assessment of wood resources, because we know forests are, I mean, the multifunctionality of forest is becoming more and more relevant. If we think about the climate dimension, biodiversity, land and water, and so on. So this system, the monitoring system, has the need to provide information for a series of sector and services at once. So climate mitigation, biodiversity, of course, the bioeconomy, the availability of forest-based product. That's from my point of view another important challenge that we have to face. So to have it more holistic compared to the other system that we had in the past, where we had NFI more looking at wood resources, if you want, and then maybe look as to soils and so on. Now we have to think about in a more holistic way. Then if a third challenge that is already emerging from what the other speakers of the panel have expressed is that we have to make full use of the potential of all these various data streams that are available nowadays. So this system should build from the beginning on the integration of ground measurements and satellite observation from the beginning. And in a way, that's the only possibility we see to achieve that level of consistency, robustness in the information, but at the same time allow us to have disaggregated statistics at spatial scale, to have maps, and to be timely in the report, which is also extremely needed to guide policies in a time of rapid changes as we are facing at the moment. So thinking about all the various challenges, so yes, we have to be European, we have to let's say look at the multifunctionality, we have to integrate measurements, but I think that the last challenge that I see, and is probably the most relevant, it has also to be a system that is bridging across communities. And we have seen already today, and for that point of view, I really like the discussion, because we have Johannes and Ruben coming from different communities speaking and start to, agreeing or arguing on topics. This is very important. This method should bridge communities from national inventories to plant ecologies, expert in biodiversity, expert in remote sensing, and including also the vision of the forest-based industries and the needs of the bioeconomy in general. So this is a challenge, but also a great opportunity to advance together in the understanding of how forests are currently, their extent, if you want, the resources, the health, all the elements we need to safeguard our forest and the multiple ecosystem services that they provide. It's really the only way we have to bring together the various need of the society, from having a viable and sustainable bioeconomy, but also achieve at the same time the need of having climate mitigation and protect biodiversity in water and soil. This, in a nutshell, the challenges we have ahead of us. There are several, and they can be achieved only with full cooperation across community. And from this point of view, I really enjoy what you have organized today. Is exactly a step in the right direction.
So given that you already said with your last sentence what I wanted to ask you next, because you were listing the challenges, which I agree that are quite challenges, but you said that they only can be bridged with good collaboration and good understanding of each other, and bridging these divides between the different communities. So I would also understand that this means that in building such a system, this is a precondition that such a collaboration exists, that GRC nor any other organization can in isolation develop a system that will then address all these without then bouncing into new challenges, I assume.
Yeah, that's definitely what we believe. And this is actually how I think is developing, and how it will develop in the new forest strategy, where I see these various elements also within the Commission, the FISE, the Environmental Agency, the Copernicus program, and from our side, the European Observatory on Deforestation, Forest Degradation, and Changes in the World Forest. These are all elements of this puzzle that we have to compile, but also the new forest science partnership. Well, JLC will try to bridge between the knowledge, the expert knowledge we have in the scientific community in Europe and the world, and the need of the Commission and the society and the industry to have reliable data. That's the game we will try to play, actually, to be there, to be able to condense this knowledge into a new generation of products that can serve, let's say, the European society. And the flow will be JLC helping in the development of these tools, in gathering new knowledge, exploring potential, and then in cooperation with Copernicus, operationalize the system that eventually will be finally distributed to FISE and the European agency. This is the vision, how is depicted also in the new forest strategy. And that certainly, as you see, is a lot of interaction, interplay between communities, and there's a role for many actors to play.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Also very nice that you mentioned the science partnership that is mentioned in the new EU forest strategy, because many of us saw two different types of partnerships, one more under Horizon Europe, and for this first one that you mentioned now here, there were some question marks, and I think it's very nice that you clarify these things. Thank you for this. And now, before I forget our last panelist, Anne-Marie, because Alessandro was already mentioning FISE being part of this big visionary idea of creating a European system. How do you see that the FISE will in the future develop? What type of information or what type of data will you try to collect there, and how to contact it also with different other initiatives?
Yes, thank you, Robert, and thank you to all for this very interesting discussion. I'm very happy to be present today. Well, I think that I want to echo a lot, first of all, to start with some of the challenges that Alessandra was mentioning. I think they are really reflecting the challenges that you also find in FISE. So I just want to flag that. I also want to flag a challenge that was not mentioned so much, is also that you may have a lot of information available, but it's so important to know how to communicate, disseminate it in the right way. And so you have to know your audience, you know, the needs that you have. And I think for FISE, which is like having the ambition of being a single web entry point for getting it to forest information, it's important to know how to keep the interest of the users and reflect the needs, and also balancing the user friendliness and the level of information. So it's not only to researchers, it's also to policymakers. And I think I only want to repeat shortly that this huge challenge is really the access to key policy relevant and evidence-based forest information, and to have it at high spatial temporal level at European level. So FISES is really trying to do that. It's also trying to make the transversal connection. There's room for a lot of future development, and this is what you just asked me for. And I think it's important to continue to improve the functionalities, continue to try to connect to different sources of information, different processes to gather together the information. Also, well knowing how difficult it is to produce a comprehensive and consistent picture of what is happening in Europe's forests. And this is still due to the differences between the sources of information regarding objective, focus, methods, and so on. But in the future, we will really try to reach out cooperation with the NFIs and other inventory and monitoring activities, and try to share the harmonized information that is already existing, and try to be part of the process also for the gathering of further harmonized and maybe even standardized information. And also what was mentioned before, it's really to integrate remote sensing information to get timely and real time is very ambitious, but this is what is needed to adapt dynamically to the policy needs. It's also to be timely in the delivery of your information, and in particular really to get higher spatial and temporal resolution. So we will work on that. And another thing connected to the communication that I forgot to say is that I think it's important to be disseminating lay summaries, highlights, key messages to heighten the awareness of what is happening in the forest and in the forest sectors. And I think storytelling is even more important, because this is a way to guide the user, the policymaker and other users across all the many aspects on forests, which goes from well, across regions, across sectors, across ecosystem, across policy processes. And as Alessandra was saying that it's about connecting land and water and soil, and all this for the support of the European policies. I think the last thing I want to say is that a point which FISA wants to do in the future is also to expand the facilitation of information to researchers. So really to put together access to the existing research base behind. And all this really needs the common efforts across the forest world. So I see the agenda is quite full, but I think it's very important to say that this is not an exercise that should be done alone. It's really based on collaboration and cooperation and partnership networks.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm very glad to hear at least one thing that was very, very consistent, even though all the speakers or all the panelists have a little bit of a different background and a different perspective. But one word that sounded very much was collaboration and integration and understanding each other. And I think that this is something that is really, really important, starting from collecting data to understanding the needs till the end, disseminating the information and telling stories, knowing the end users, and also being able to represent the highly diverse forest in Europe. I think that is quite a challenge ahead, and that cannot be solved by only one party. Let's put it like that. And it was an extremely interesting discussion. Unfortunately, not enough time to really go now to another round of reactions, which I am sure that you would all be able to do and reflect. But I think that my colleagues here will then short in very few minutes mute me and finish this first session this morning. So thank you very much for being willing to be here. I know that some of you have busy schedules also with other things. So I really thank you, and also thank you very much for your insights, not only to the panelists, but also to the keynote speakers that already before a little bit set the ground and provided some of the information. So with this, I would like to close this panel, and I'm sorry that we haven't had more time also for address if there would be any other questions. Now, before moving over to the coffee break, what I would like to mention are two things. First of all, we are gathering again at 1:05. That is Central European time, so it would be 2:05 in Finland and 12:05 in Portugal and or the UK. And at that time, I will put you into hands of my colleague Helga Pölzl, who just recently started as the Assistant Director for Policy Support at EFI. She's not expert in forest monitoring or similar, but she is on the international forest governance and policy change and bioeconomic perceptions in the society. So she has a very different perspective than me, who started his research career as somebody doing ICP forest level 1 assessments of defoliation plots. So I really enjoyed this here today. Thank you very much. And now during the coffee break, you will have the opportunity to see a video that presents the activities of the Faculty of Forest and Wood Sciences of the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague. And I hope you will enjoy that video, and see you all in about 30 minutes. Thank you very much again, panelists, and also the audience for your patience with us. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you.
The Faculty of Forestry and Wood Sciences of the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague provides environmental education for all ages. Most attention is focused on the education of children and youth. We educate the general and professional public at various events and fairs in Prague and throughout the Czech Republic. Every year we organise workshops for secondary school students where they try out the work of a scientist at our faculty. We are a long-term organiser of the Prague Regional Round as well as the national round of the long-standing international competition on forest and nature, Young People in European Forests. We implement forest pedagogy programs directly in the forest using certified forest teachers, and we also educate new forest teachers. Thanks to these activities, we inform the public about current problems in the field of environment, forestry, wood sciences and hunting. We explain the burning problems of society and the relationship between humans and the environment in the context of sustainable development and climate change. We integrate our activities into school teaching, but we also use printed material, websites and media campaigns. We popularize the results of our science and research. Our employees often appear in all types of national as well as international media, from television to radio. Through all these activities, we teach respect and understanding of nature, the coexistence of humans and nature, responsibility, tolerance, solidarity between generations, and long-term thinking. We do all of this in order to follow our faculty motto, Mihi Curi Futuri, we care about the future. The Faculty of Forestry and Wood Sciences of the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague provides environmental education for all ages. Most attention is focused on the education of children and youth. We educate the general and professional public at various events and fairs in Prague and throughout the Czech Republic. Every year we organise workshops for secondary school students where they try out the work of a scientist at our faculty. We are a long-term organizer of the Prague regional round, as well as the national round of the long-standing international competition on forest and nature, Young People in European Forests. We implement forest pedagogy programs directly in the forest using certified forest teachers, and we also educate new forest teachers. Thanks to these activities, we inform the public about current problems in the field of environment, forestry, wood sciences, and hunting. We explain the burning problems of society and the relationship between humans and the environment in the context of sustainable development and climate change. We integrate our activities into school teaching, but we also use printed material, websites, and media campaigns. We popularize the results of our science and research. Our employees often appear in all types of national as well as international media, from television to radio. Through all these activities, we teach respect and understanding of nature, the coexistence of humans and nature, responsibility, tolerance, solidarity between generations, and long-term thinking. We do all of this in order to follow our faculty motto, Mihi Curi Futuri, we care about the future. The Faculty of Forestry and Wood Sciences of the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague provides environmental education for all ages. Most attention is focused on the education of children and youth. We educate the general and professional public at various events and fairs in Prague and throughout the Czech Republic. Every year we organize workshops for secondary school students where they try out the work of a scientist at our faculty. We are a long-term organizer of the Prague regional round, as well as the national round of the long-standing international competition on forest and nature, Young People in European Forests. We implement forest pedagogy programs directly in the forest using certified forest teachers, and we also educate new forest teachers. Thanks to these activities, we inform the public about current problems in the field of environment, forestry, wood sciences, and hunting. We explain the burning problems of society and the relationship between humans and the environment in the context of sustainable development and climate change. We integrate our activities into school teaching, but we also use printed material, websites, and media campaigns. We popularize the results of our science and research. Our employees often appear in all types of national as well as international media, from television to radio. Through all these activities, we teach respect and understanding of nature, the coexistence of humans and nature, responsibility, tolerance, solidarity between generations, and long-term thinking. We do all of this in order to follow our faculty motto, Mihi Curi Futuri, we care about the future. The Faculty of Forestry and Wood Sciences of the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague provides environmental education for all ages. Most attention is focused on the education of children.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone to this new second session of our scientific seminar. We had a very interesting morning session, and I'm totally sure that we have a very interesting second session. And without further ado, I would like to immediately present the first speaker. It's Dr. Stefanie Linzer. She's a senior scientist at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna, and also EFI's Forest Policy Research Network. Stefanie is a recognized expert on indicators for sustainable forest management and coordinates the EU4 Working Party on research and development of indicators for SFNM, and she's also a deputy leader of the UNEC FAO team of specialists. So welcome, Stefanie. Please share your screen and put your presentation on.
Thank you, Helga. My screen should be shared. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I was invited today to talk about forest relevant targets in EU policy instruments and whether the progress can be measured with available indicators and data. And my presentation is based on a joint paper of Markus Lier and Kari Korhonen from Luke in Joensuu, Michael Köhl from the University of Hamburg, Kit Prince, the former head of the UNECE Forestry and Timber section, and myself. And initial consideration, our joint work comprised that under the umbrella of the European Green Deal, there are a number of policy instruments with specific objectives and targets. And we were interested if those targets address forest policy and management and whether they could be assessed by existing tools and data. As part of the development of new EU forest strategy, the European Commission stressed the need to strategically address increasing fragmentation of EU forest-related policies and improve their coordination and coherence. And in our analysis, we investigated the following recent EU strategies: the forest strategy from 2013, because when we started, the new forest strategy was not yet out.
I'm sorry,
the
Stefanie.
Strategy. Sorry?
I'm sorry, Stefanie, to interrupt, but it seems your internet is not so stable. Would you maybe put off the video so it would be more easy to follow your slides? Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. So we investigated the following strategies: the forest strategy, the bioeconomy strategy, the European Green Deal, the farm to fork strategy, the biodiversity strategy, and the strategy on adaptation to climate change, as well as the sustainable investment regulation. And in these policy instruments, we identified 8 quantitative and 16 qualitative targets addressing forest issues. And in this respect, quantitative targets are those which focus on outcomes or results which are measurable. For instance, legally protect a minimum of 30% land. And qualitative targets are those targets which are not quantifiable or have not been set in a quantified way. For instance, to improve EU forest area in quality. And 11 of those identified forest relevant targets are to be found in the EU biodiversity strategy, as you can see here on the screen. And we found no forest relevant targets in the sustainable investment regulation, nor in the strategy on adaptation to climate change. And this research was completed before the EU Taxonomy Climate Delegated Act and the new EU forest strategy were presented, which contain some further forest relevant targets. Here you can see that we grouped the identified targets under 6 main topics, which are coherent with the 6 pan-European criteria for sustainable forest management. And most of the targets were focusing on forest biological diversity, namely on the conservation of biodiversity, on protection, on restoration, and on genetic diversity. And only one target was focusing on the productive function of forests. Some other targets concerning the other main criteria or topics, they were always covered by 2 to 5 targets which we found. And secondly, we were interested if the progress monitoring towards targets can make use of the pan-European indicators, particularly the 34 quantitative pan-European indicators for sustainable forest management, which were originally developed already in 1998 and then revised in 2003 and in 2015. And as an example, I present here each one quantitative and one qualitative target. So the quantitative target here in this example is legally protect a minimum of 30% of the EU's land. For that, we can use the Forest Europe indicators 1.1 forest area and 4.9 protected forests, and they are applicable as such as the information on share of protected forest area in total forest area can be obtained via these indicators and the related data. My example for the qualitative target is to improve EU forest area both in quality and in quantity. Here we have a multitude of potential indicators like forest area, growing stock, carbon stock, all indicators under criterion 2, health and vitality, and also all indicators under criterion 4, biodiversity. And to use these indicators to monitor the target's progress, major adjustments are needed because we need a clarification which aspects to improve. There's a need for objective and measurable definitions, and particularly as the target says, improve quality, we need thresholds and targets for each indicator for a proper progress monitoring towards this certain improvement. So in our analysis, we had assigned the pan-European indicators to every identified target and describe how effective the indicator or the indicators are to monitor progress towards the target. And from that, we derived if the necessary information provided according to the indicator is applicable as such, or if minor or major adjustments are needed. And resulting, we observed that progress on 13 of 24 identified forest relevant targets could be reported by the pan-European indicators with no adjustment or very minor indicator modifications. And we also observed that 22 of the 34 quantitative pan-European indicators are potentially suitable to provide information on progress towards the identified EU forest relevant targets. And this table here now presents the pan-European indicators with respect to their possible contribution to the different strategies. Now, without explicitly mentioning the targets, which were presented in another much more complex table, which I could not display here. But also from this table, it becomes obvious that the indicators are mainly applicable as they stand to provide information on progress towards forest relevant targets only for the forest strategy and the farm to fork strategy. You can see it in this highlighted green rows. But there need to be major adjustments to do though for the European Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy. These are these purple highlighted roles. And we found it also very interesting that the production and the socioeconomic indicators, which are highlighted in yellow, they are barely reflected by any related targets.
Stephanie, you have 1 more minute.
Yes, I will manage. I'm here already with the conclusions. So based on our results, we can conclude that the policymakers in the EU institutions and elsewhere, when developing forest relevant targets, they could consider the following. If targets are formulated, they should be quantitative and measurable and address all aspects of sustainable forest management. And they should also take into account if the respective target information can be efficiently and transparently measured using commonly used terms and indicators, which are already well established and being monitored. And we, the authors, see a clear potential on using the pan-European indicators and the related data to inform on progress towards the EU forest relevant targets. And this approach should then also avoid additional but similar data collection. And with this, I thank you for your attention. And if you are interested in the full paper link, in the full paper, the link is displayed here, or you can find it also on ResearchGate under our name. Thank you. And I'm sorry for the unstable connection.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for keeping the time so well. I think it is very important that somebody looks into EU policy instruments and sees which the quantitative and qualitative targets are that we need to measure. We have one question from the floor from Markus Lindner, and the question reads like, did you explore also the national variations in definitions of indicator? For example, it is not very consistent how different protection categories are applied in different countries. For example, what means strict protection? Does it allow salvage cutting in case of large disturbances? Stephanie, can you maybe reply to this question?
Yes, Markus, we did not look at national variations. So we just investigated on the pan-European indicators, but your question with the strict protection is very relevant, as for example, we found also that there is this target from the biodiversity strategy on strictly protect all the EU's remaining primary and old growth forests. And this target has a very high importance for the European Commission. And within Forest Europe, we have this indicator 4.3 on naturalness with its classes undisturbed by man, semi-natural and plantations. And we have the indicator 4.9 on protected forests. But we can only provide so far information on strictly protected forest area, but we cannot say how much of the old growth forests are strictly protected, for example. And it would require a spatial intersection of both types of information. So which part of the protected forests are under, which part of the old growth forests are under protection, for example. So this target is a very good example how complicated it is to provide good data and information for this target progress assessment.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And while I'm asking you to close your presentation, and our support now puts up Thomas Hausmann's presentation, I have the pleasure to introduce him shortly. Thomas Hausmann is the head of the liaison unit Bonn of the Forest Europe process, and Thomas has more than 30 years of experience in different international forest policy positions. He has not only worked as a national expert at the European Commission in Brussels, but also in Rome, FAO, and has been the chair of the UNECE ICP Forest in Geneva. So we are very pleased to welcome Thomas to give his presentation on the future plans for the pan-European indicators. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Helga, and maybe already the second slide. Thanks for inviting me and for the nice introduction. Recently, I met a friend and a colleague who is working at the EU level in Brussels, and he mentioned to me that foresters cannot prove that the European forests are managed sustainable. And he even added that there is a lack of a European-wide harmonized and robust information. I could, of course, make my life very easy after this excellent presentation by Stefanie Linser and saying that there is, of course, a concept which has been adopted by ministers from 45 European countries. You will see here that this, of course, as a follow-up, resulted in criteria indicators, where Stefanie mentioned quite some of them. And of course, those data are also published in the Surovy report. But I think what is important to add is, also following the debate we had so far, is that this concept is not a static concept, but a dynamic one. And Stefanie just mentioned the progress over the time. The second point, what is very important for us, is that it's a balanced concept, including ecological, economical, and social aspects. And we discussed, I think, quite a bit about national forest inventories, which is the backbone of the criteria indicator. We still believe that this is the best available data also, which allows transnational comparability. And by the way, that is what maybe also one of the reasons why nearly all the EU member states in the negotiations of the EU Council conclusions at the moment focus and reiterate the importance of the SFM concept of Forest Europe. But of course, there are also limits, and also Stefanie and many speakers before mentioned this. We are in a discussion with the National Forest Inventory correspondence. One of the issue is data completeness. Also the timeliness of the data, looking at the intervals of the inventories is an issue. And maybe we also invited our signatories to join the test run of the FAO, which has been recently agreed at the COFO. And of course, data quality and lack of data in areas like biodiversity and in the forest damage area is an issue where we will work on. Next slide, please. What is maybe interesting for the audience is to get some information on our recently adopted new work program of Forest Europe for the next few years. And I will focus at this slide on communication. And here I think it's very important that we still have a communication issue. Annemarie Bastow-Birk mentioned the storytelling approach, which we very much support. We put a lot of emphasis also in our social media on this aspect, because we still believe that we need to explain to policymakers, but also to the society, that the SFM concept does not only mean to harvest trees, but of course also that this includes, as mentioned before, set aside areas for nature protection and all other aspects of the forest functions. Next slide, please. However, in the focus of our work is the SFM concept, and I like very much in the first part of this conference the issue of cooperation, also mentioned by Annemarie Bastow-Birk once more. So this is also our idea of the think tank, where we would not just like to get the, let's say, traditional experts involved, but also build bridges to experts outside our forest silo. So I would like to connect this with an open invitation. Discussion point is also the information needs, that was also mentioned just by Stefanie. But of course, we need also to be realistic which data can be provided by NFI or other data sources. A second point I would like to highlight is that we have to verify if the SFM concept still satisfies information need of today's society. So whether we might also have to create new narratives. And the third point which we would like to focus is on a set of key indicators. And also here, I would like to connect this again with communication. Next slide, please. What was not mentioned so far today was that, of course, the European region is not alone on this topic. As you know, there is a Montreal process and many other processes worldwide. Forest Europe is cooperating with those initiatives also to further develop the concepts. And a second point, which is very important, that we have partners. UNEC and FIO are the main partners here, also in data collection. We already started the discussion on the next round of data collection for the report, which will be published in 2025. And I think what is very important and was maybe not highlighted so often today is that we need to ease the way of data submission for the national correspondence. So that means only submit data once. And then, of course, it's up to the different partners to agree how to get the data for each needs out of this database. And this is exactly what is state of the art. And of course, we understand, as I mentioned already, that the development of further indicators is a topic which needs to be discussed with partners. Next slide. I would like now to focus on two topics which will be in the focus of our Forest Europe work. One was already mentioned, I think also by Markus Lindner now, the issue of the forest risk knowledge mechanism. So the question, how resilient are forests against climate change? We will put a focus here. And we understand that maybe also some new forms of information are needed. And of course, it's maybe known to many of you that at the moment UNEC is working on the forest damage indicator in a case study. Michael Köhl and other colleagues are working on this. The second part I would like to highlight is the issue, and this is the next slide, please, is the issue on employment and education. Also one of the areas where the current indicator is rather traditional on the traditional forest cluster. However, we all know that this need to be expanded to along the whole value chain to get bioeconomy, jobs in the area of bioeconomy, or for example, education also here into the focus. We are quite happy that an in-kind contribution by Germany with its research institute, the Thun Institute, will help to get new data on green jobs. So we are quite confident that we could add a lot of new information in this area. So the next slide is already my final slide. If you would please go on, thank you. So the outlook, I mentioned that one of the key topics of our work will be the focus on data quality, completeness. I should also maybe add the term timeliness. We also hope that here within the NFI, the discussion on remote sensing and satellite data, which we had today, could maybe also help to get more timeliness data. Then, of course, I mentioned the criterion indicator as a key instrument. So there is the focus more of the question of interpretation of further development of this criterion indicator. And I underlined the need to cooperate with other international processes. And finally, just to mention that the think tank, where I mentioned an open invitation, should start in early 2022. So with this, and maybe the last slide to show that we are active, by the way, today, we have started also our Instagram channel, and we are all invited not only to visit us at the website or social media, but also to get in contact with us. Also, Dr. Bernhard Wolfslehner, the team leader of the EFI, is more than happy if you would contact us. With this, I would like to give back to you, Helga, and thanks for your attention.
Thomas, many thanks for your great presentation and also for keeping the time so well. It was very interesting to hear that the SFM concept is not static but dynamic, especially though also that you always look into the indicators and constantly improve the indicators to collect data on SFM. I just have a look at the Q&A session, whether there is a question, but so far I cannot see any question. So I would suggest that, oh, now there's a question. Okay, again from Marcus. Thank you for being so active, Marcus. So the question is, does Forest Europe plan to collaborate with the EC on their plans to develop new certification, perhaps CNI related to close to nature forestry? Thomas, could you maybe try to answer this question?
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. First of all, maybe it's not known to all of you that I mentioned 45 countries. I forgot to mention that the Commission is also a signatory of Forest Europe. So they are, of course, involved in all our debates. Therefore, it's self-understanding that there is a close cooperation. We are in bilateral discussions with the Commission, also here on the issue. But especially to your question, certification scheme, we have not been yet in a discussion. I also understand that, first of all, it's up to the member states and the Commission to debate on the EU forest strategy. There is this council conclusions I just mentioned, which are prepared by the Slovenian EU presidency at the moment. So I understand that Forest Europe is here at the moment more in the observer role to follow up the discussion. But of course, we understand that a lot of issues have direct influence to the work of Forest Europe, not only in the area of data, as also Annemarie Bastrop-Birk mentioned it. And we are more than open here, of course, to cooperate, as I mentioned it during my presentation several times, with all partners, because we believe that the forestry world is, should, let's say, liaison their energy also in order to be heard outside our small world.
Many thanks, Thomas, for your straightforward answer to that. I would now like to pass the word to Dr. Bernhard Wolfslehner, who was the co-presenter of Thomas' presentation. Dr. Wolfslehner is team leader of the EFI Forest Europe team, and he's strongly engaged in scientific guidance, coordination, and communication in the Forest Europe process. And he was my former boss before I joined EFI. So he's the research network coordinator. He was the research network coordinator and head of EFI's Forest Policy Research Network. So welcome, Bernhard. The floor is yours, and you have a very attractive panel to present.
Yes, thank you, Helga. Thank you very much. I think we are now moving towards a peak, also to get this red line from these very interesting presentations in the morning towards then the policy implications of this topic of monitoring of data. So I think this is now, I think, a quite good red line that we can follow based on the previous speakers. So my job is now, and it is a little bit different than compared to some 6 years ago when I did this in St. Petersburg in person. So it's a bit different now here sitting from remote. But anyways, I hope we can all enjoy this now. The question is, which data for informed policy making? So this is the issue of the panel discussion. I think we have a very well-known panel here, which I may introduce to you, and this would also be the asking the participants to take the virtual floor, joining with their cameras while I will introduce them to you. So at first, it's Ansi Pekkarinen, who is Senior Forestry Officer at UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and he's the coordinator of the Global Forest Resources Assessment Program. So he's specialized in forest inventory, remote sensing, and geographic information systems. And then it's Claudia Olasabal, who is head of the Land Use and Management Unit at the European Commission DG for the Environment. So prior to that, she was for 4 years the deputy head of the biodiversity unit within the same DG. Third is Eva Müller. She is Director General for Forest Sustainability and Renewable Resources of the German Federal Ministry for Food and Agriculture. Previously, she has worked in various positions at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, at the International Tropical Timber Organization, and with the German Agency for Technical Cooperation. And finally, we welcome Tuula Packalen. She is Director General of Natural Resources Department at the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Finland. And prior to that, research professor in forest planning at Natural Resources Institute Finland. She has 25 years of experience in policy relevant research projects. So I think we have a very nice panel here, and I would like to start with the questions for you, the participants. So like in the earlier sessions, so please use frequently the Q&A section to pose your questions. You can start immediately during the talks, and we will try to pick this up then after the respondents or the responses of the panelists. So I start with, like in the order that I proposed, with Ansi. Ansi, are you here?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Good, yeah. Welcome, Ansi.
Thank you, Bernard.
So now, of course, now looking to a perspective of FAO, and Thomas mentioned already that you are also a key partner in our collaboration. So I would like to ask you, what are the key activities of FAO on global, but also on European level in terms of, getting or collecting, improving forest data?
Thank you, Bernard. It's quite a big question, but let me try to identify the key points. Of course, our long-term objective at all levels, including the Europe, is to improve the quality, timeliness, consistency, accessibility, and transparency of forest-related data and information. And in concrete terms, this means that we support the countries in their efforts to establish multi-purpose and multi-source national forest monitoring systems. And of course, the ultimate objective of that work is to have systems that can produce accurate and timely information on forest resources, their management uses, in an affordable, timely, and self-sustained manner. And how do we then work to achieve this all? First of all, we work on guidance. One example of that is the recent voluntary guideline document on voluntary guidelines of national forest monitoring, published a few years ago. And we developed tools and methodologies for data collection in the field and using remote sensing under what we call an open forest initiative. These tools cover the whole inventory and monitoring process, from the survey design to data collection and reporting. And the tools that we are working on are all free and open source, and they can be used for any purpose by anyone. And for more info, please visit our website at openforest.org. And in addition to these two activities, we of course provide related training. But then finally, and that is my kind of day job, we are responsible for the Global Forest Resources Assessment, or FRA as we call it. And FRA is a process of collection, compilation, analysis, and dissemination of official national statistics on more than 60 variables from all the countries and territories, all the 236 countries and territories of the world. And this process is done through a global network of FRA national correspondents that we currently have in 187 countries and territories. And these experts are the cornerstone of the whole process. And I think that some of them are present here in this meeting, and many thanks to those of you that have supported this process in a way or another. We have also, talking about key activities, invested significantly in digitalization of this FRA process. And for the last assessment, we built a completely new digital data entry platform that reduces the reporting burden of the national correspondence, as mentioned by Thomas already. And this was later further developed into an open access dissemination tool that makes all the data and metadata the countries reported to FRA 2020 available to the public through an easy to use interface. And regarding Europe-specific activities, I'm happy to confirm that or inform you that during the last Global Forest Resources Assessment, FAO, UNEC, and Forest Europe already managed to synchronize FRA and pan-European data collection processes, and the data for FRA and State of Europe's forest reports were collected at the same time through the same national correspondence and through the same FRA digital platform. And the quantitative data actually now also available through the FRA platform for the users. And this collaboration was an excellent experience. And as Mr. Hausmann mentioned already in his keynote, we plan to further strengthen this collaboration in the coming years. And that's all from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans, for this first intro into the topic. I think what is really important is to really sort of harvest the synergies that we need to do, because one of the issues was always this reporting burden that was, I think, putting a lot of pressure on the national correspondents. I think this is something we always have to keep in mind when talking also about data and data collection. But now moving on to Claudia. So great that you could make it here to this panel. I think there has been a lot of discussions around the recent EU forest strategy, where forest monitoring is a very strong topic. So I would like to ask you to tell us a bit from the perspective of the European Commission. So what are the main cornerstones for future forest monitoring and data use, and that you would like to share with us? Claudia.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to thank EFI for this very timely and very needed conference, bringing together many people and giving us the chance to participate. Let me start by saying that the story of the EU on forest monitoring is already 35 years old. So we have a whole story. It doesn't come only from the new forest strategy. It's the forest strategy is only the culmination of many years of this. So we started in 1986 with a regulation on monitoring of atmospheric pollution effects on forest. Then in 2002 we started with the forest fires. Then in 2003 we had the first attempt with the regulation. So it's been regulated already 3 times. First attempt to monitor atmospheric pollution effects, forest fires, but also to have a comprehensive monitoring system for the EU that would look at also at the state of forest, particularly carbon, particularly soil, particularly biodiversity, and particularly the resilience of forest to the impacts of climate change. So we have already regulated on this 3 times in the EU, and the EU put 65 million euros in the context of the forest focus regulation, which expired in 2007. So 65 million euros, helping member states and contributing, supporting, sometimes by 50% co-funding or 75% co-funding, to help member states to set up those monitoring systems. And then the regulation expired, and some of the member states continued to do it voluntarily under the LIFE program. But what I want to say by this is that there is already a long and continuous interest of the EU to set up a monitoring system for forest, and there have been several attempts already to do so. And in the case of the Commission, we have set up already for more than a decade the Forest Information System for Europe that now is continuously being upgraded in order to provide in a centralized manner that information to all the users. So moving now, so that's the past, but the past is very important to show that this has already been a continuous effort for 35 years. So now we go to what's the new impetus for the strategy? The strategy, as many others have already heard me saying, the development of this strategy has been done in a completely different political environment compared to when we were developing the 2013 one. So the scrutiny, the public interest, the civil society interest, the academia interest, the EU institutions interest on the forest now is, I would say, exponentially higher than it used to be. I mean, the importance of forest is the same. They were equally important in 2013 and equally important in 2000, but the realization of the importance of forest for many of our crucial challenges in the EU is become much higher. It also means that there are many more demandeurs and users of this forest data, because they've seen that forests have an impact on many other areas and they want to know how these forests are doing. So in that sense, we have many more users interested, many more means to provide the data, and at the core of all this, and I would certainly agree with Mr. Hosman, the backbone of this are the national forest inventory. Those are the backbone of whatever system that could come up with. But we need to indeed, now that we have the digital agenda on which we can tap, we have new technologies on which we must, and we are already tapping. And we need to have a system, a monitoring system in the EU. So we have to do a new attempt after many that have been done in the past. We have to equip the EU with the necessary monitoring system to underpin many of our policies that depend on forest: bioeconomy, biodiversity, bioenergy, and certainly climate change. So in that sense, we need to equip ourselves. And that means that from the beginning, you have to have a monitoring system that relies on on-ground monitoring as well as remote sensing monitoring. So in the conception of it, these two things need to be from the beginning. What do we expect? I think I have the same wish list as Mr. Osman and Mr. Pekarin, and that is, of course, we want completeness. We need to complete the data gaps. Of course, we want timeliness. Of course, we want better data at higher resolution. I mean, the wish list is long, but we are not that far apart, provided that we all work together, because the effort that we would have to do in order to get the data sets that we want, we can do it if provided that we all work together in providing data. And that's also the part on reporting, the part on which is very strong also in the new strategy. There are many more users of the data, but there are many more people that are generating data. That also means we have many industries that have data, and they could also made it available. Of course, member states which are doing that with national money. There are other stakeholders which are generating data that could be shared. So it's also an issue of sharing data. So the transparency and the open source data, that it's something that we could fill those knowledge gaps much quicker. And the second thing is the comparability of the data. I think this has been touched upon. Mr. Hosman saying, well, data is comparable to some extent. By doing the Pfizer, we've realized by doing years of Pfizer, and the colleagues in GRC and the EEA know this very well, since they've done it for us. There are big problems of comparability of data, since the data often has been acquired and generated following different methodologies. So there's the issue of what are the things we don't need to harmonize and we will have comparable data sets, and what are the things that some harmonization level would be needed in order to have comparable data sets. So these indeed, those are the things that I would say in terms of introductory remarks. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this was a very comprehensive wrap up of your position and also the views, what is needed. Again, I think that what is called for is really the collaboration on this issue, so that we don't have too many parallel activities. And I hope also that we can all work together on these future challenges in forest monitoring here. I think this is highly important, but it was a perfect wrap up of the things that are on the table now. Thank you. I continue with Eva. So just now looking a bit more to national perspectives, and I would like to ask you, I'm also interested to see that also not at least given the huge forest damages in recent years that we experienced in Central Europe. So what from your perspective is which forest data are needed in the future in Germany, or also possibly lacking? So how do you judge this?
Thank you, Bernhard, and also thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, I think we will continue to need the classic data on forest area, tree species, timber volume, increment and harvest that we have been collecting in the past, because we do not only need information on the current state, but also on the development over time. So that information will continue to be important for us. Having said this, in view of the climate and biodiversity crisis, there is other additional information that will become more important to us. And that concerns in particular ecological questions, such as forest structure, deadwood, carbon, site conditions, soil, nutrients, water balance, habitat types, and species. For these questions, the existing inventories we have in Germany, such as our Federal Forest Inventory, the Soil Condition Survey, and the Forest Condition Survey, provide us with an enormous pool of data. And this data can certainly be evaluated even more intensively than before for specific new objectives. For example, our new Federal Forest Inventory, which has recently been started, will tackle even difficult questions such as the genetic structure of forest. And that demonstrates also the suitability of this well-proven inventory medium for answering new questions as well. But there are also data gaps, of course. First of all, in Germany, the question of insect mortality has been very important in the past years and has occupied not only us as policymakers, but the public in general as well. So we need to be developing new methods to assess insect mortality for both open land and the forest. And there we are still in the development phase, and there are a lot of fundamental questions that still need to be clarified, because it's generally impossible to survey the entire insect population. You have to focus possibly on a few key species. But the question is, which species do we concentrate on in the survey? What are decisive indicator species for describing the condition, stability, or resilience of forest ecosystems? And how variable are species in space and time? And I think the answer to these questions will determine the methods to be used. A second big point you have already mentioned is climate change. We've had tremendous damages in the last couple of years because of droughts, storms, and insect attacks. And that, of course, raises new questions. On the one hand, we have to address these questions in the existing monitoring systems in order to be able to describe the development of forests over time. But on the other hand, we also need new monitoring tools that enable us to detect the acute damages and allow us to react more quickly. And for this, together with our state governments and research institute, we are currently developing a new remote sensing-based system to assess and monitor forest damage, with the aim to generally improve our crisis management for forests. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is gives a quite good overview, and I think we heard several times now the issue of timeliness of information. I think this will be one of the challenges, and I also heard from Ansi in the beginning that we have this prototype or this check now to have more frequent data, which we also communicated in the first year process to really test this and be active in this. Because I think it's very important that we don't only talk about past events, but talk also about the current situation and the future. So I think this is a very strong demand also towards us to really provide timely data on this. I would move on now to Tula. Welcome, Tula. So since Finland is one of the forerunners in the bioeconomy, I would like to ask you what role do forest data play in the context of bioeconomy, and what is needed to have forests properly represented in the value chain? I think this is also one of the issues beyond now climate change and biodiversity to really broaden towards the whole value chain with the forest data. So how do you judge this?
Thank you, Bernhard. I think this is a very interesting point of view and differs from the previous ones. there is a lot of potential for circular forest bioeconomy in Europe to contribute to climate change mitigation and also adaptation, and at the same time to increase the extent of value added. Bio-based products can replace fossil-based materials and energy, and circular models facilitate resource and material efficiency, thus helping to decrease emissions and also environmental impacts of production. I think that this transition towards circular bioeconomy calls for digital transformation, both in public and private sectors and all levels. At strategic level, information on forest resources and future projections of their use potential is essential. It's essential as a basis for new investments and policy decisions. And here the NFIs play an important role, but we also need the NFIs to work on provision of wall-to-wall map data. At tactical level, we have landowners and managers that need mapped data on production potential, market value of different ecosystem services, and also risks to make informed decisions on the use of their forest resources. At operational level, we need detailed data on trees and their properties, and that should flow along the value chain from forest to contractors and further to mills and products and even to end users. And here digitalization supports automation in different tasks, including life cycle assessment. And I found it very interesting that Claudia mentioned that industry has data available. And I think the role of industry is very important in this operational level forest data provision. And it also links with data economy and data privacy. So there will be a lot of challenging questions for all of us to be solved. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tula. I think this is an important issue. So we see now that we have to sort to generate the going over from the traditional ways that are proved, where we have the trends, also to these new modalities with the digitalization. And I think this is one of the tasks for this decade to really manage how to deal with that. And I think this is something where I can see a common sense among the participants. So you really, connect the traditional approaches with the more modern ones, because both of them have merits, so that we really can learn from the past and move into the future. This is what I get from this, I think, a very important statement. I will go one round back to Ansi then, with the question is, we are talking about how information can, or how informed policymaking can look like. So I would like to ask you, as a very experienced person, of course, in FAO, how do you see the impact of FAO's forestry data efforts in policymaking, and what could be improved? I mean, this is again a very challenging question to you, I know, but I think it's worthwhile discussing it a bit.
Thank you, Bernard. I'll try to cover this with some examples and also focus a little bit on this, how to actually improve in the future regarding this, in this respect. Well, of course, I think that it all starts from the fact that to manage the resource and to develop the policies, one needs to know the resource. And the work that I already mentioned on improved guidance on forest monitoring and on tools and the training, they all contribute to this same objective, to better global capacity to monitor and report on forest resources for different purposes. So basically better data for better decisions. Now there is actually, talking about the impact, there's already some evidence that this work has been successful and that the global forest monitoring capacity has improved quite a bit actually during the last decades. And this improvement in tropical countries especially can be linked to international investments for forest monitoring, especially in the context of the REDD+ reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. There's also some evidence that better data actually can lead to better policies and decisions, because it's not necessarily the case always. And we have published a paper last year that provides examples how that has happened, with some concrete results at the national level, from driving down deforestation in Brazil, implementing sustainable forest management in Cameroon, and then supporting reforestation efforts in Vietnam. And another other example of the impact, again in the context of the REDD+, is that 54 countries have submitted their reference level to the UNFCCC, and more countries, of course, are expected to follow. But these 54 countries already represent 80% of the global deforestation as reported by the last FRA. And 70% of these submissions have actually been supported by FAO. So there's an impact there. What can be improved then? That is always a very interesting question. Of course, in addition to producing better data and producing it more frequently, we have to make sure that these data and results are produced and reported in a transparent way, because that makes them credible. And they have to be made accessible and usable to all users. Practical example of that, what we have done in this field, is the dissemination of official country statistics through this new FRA platform that I already mentioned. It's open access. It can be accessed by anyone, anywhere, at any time. In the past, that wasn't the case, and these country reports were actually quite difficult to use, access and especially use, because the data were provided only in a PDF format. Another important aspect from the improvement point of view is the timeliness of the data. And while this 5-year reporting cycle that we will continue to use for the full FRA reporting, it seems sufficient for most purposes, but it's not flexible enough to accommodate dissemination of the latest forest information on all the variables. In the worst case, to give you an example, a country may need to wait for 5 years to be able to report their latest forest inventory data to the global community through FRA, because that is basically the time between two subsequent data collection processes. And if the country was just finalizing their national forest inventory after we collected the data for the previous round, they will have to wait for a long time before they can share the data through FRA. And that is something that was, I think it was already mentioned, we would like to change, and we have been requested to change. And we are working on a model that would allow more frequent voluntary updates of key attributes, not all the FRA reporting content, and sharing those through FRA. And that means that when this will happen, and I hope we will be successful in these efforts, any country of the world will be able to share the latest data and results with the global community as soon as they become available. And in such a way, we can support various international policy and decision-making processes with the latest official data. This is important, I want to emphasize that. It is the official data that are also being used in the countries to develop policies and to make decisions. Back to you, Berta.
Thank you very much, Antti. I think this is a very important issue that you raised, and that also requires collaboration, both in financial terms, but also in terms that countries really contribute to or take this up. This idea, I think this is a key issue. I think we had, of course, this last example of reporting when the recent, bark beetle damages were not really sort of visible in our data. So I think this is a very timely reflection on this kind of problems, but also start tackling this. I think this is important to really inform policymaking at a very timely stage. Very good, yeah. So Claudia, now, of course, as I mentioned, you touched a little bit upon this, and there's a bit of debate now about how these different instruments can come together. And I would like to hear your opinion, how you see the interplay between national forest data generation efforts like national forest inventories, and also the planned EU activities, so as they are outlined in the EU forest strategy. So where do you see the synergies, or where do you see the needs for new activities?
I think that I would start by in the same starting point as Mr. Pekarinen, which means that any policy making on whatever of the actions which are outlined in the strategy would be developed on a very strong evidence-based. But the thing of the evidence base on which but at European level, but national level or regional level, because many of the forest decisions are taken at a much lower local and regional level than in the EU. So at whatever level, indeed, you need a very strong evidence base. And what we see that is that the necessity to fill in gaps and to have data that is comparable, so that you can have the whole overview to base your decisions on. No? So in that sense, as I said in my previous intervention, NFIs are really the backbone, but we need to also equip the NFIs to have to be looking at all the things. Also means, I think there's a question on means, who's going to pay for all this, and perhaps we get to that in a second. But so in terms of means, and they are looking at the things we're going to need them to look at, and then to use that data and data also. Data collections, which is remote sensing, but not only. I mean, there are a lot of digital apps, etc., that make things cheaper on the ground to be measured, and that would help the decision making. And one thing that I would certainly join Ansi in saying is the issue of timeliness. Because the reporting obligations that we have, for instance, the Habitats Article 17, which is the biggest reporting mechanism we have for forest ecosystem status in protected areas in Natura 2000 habitats, comes every 6 years. And so we are always be basing our decision making on things which have been coming some years. And in forests, perhaps in the past it was okay, this kind of scale, but now things are moving very fast in forests, in terms also on demand, but also in terms of climate effects, in terms of populations of biodiversity. So things are moving very, very fast. So this reporting and time periods might be in some cases a difficulty for timely decision making. So I think timeliness it really is at the heart of having the evidence, the best evidence base for the decision making, which needs to be faster. No? So what's the role of NFIs? They are backbones of any decision, but for that we need to also have access to the data of these NFIs. I mean, in the past we've been ourselves paying for FISA, we've been paying to buy data from NFI. So we were paying for data which was collected with public funds. So we were paying with public funds, public data. So I don't want to dwell on these tricky things now of money, but it's a point. So the issue of access to the data of the NFIs is very, very important if we want indeed the NFIs to feed into policymaking.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is again something which is I interpret as an offer also to further collaborate and find new avenues of how to bring in all available data together. I think we have the right participants here also to discuss this, to really bring the elements together from all different angles. So this is what I see here, and I think this sounds also comforting then for the future. To continue with this dialogue, to also make steps forward in the issue of data collection, of monitoring, and also reporting. Thank you very much. So Eva, now for you have a more difficult question because it's more general, because you're in a very high level policymaking arena. So I would like to ask you from a view of a policymaker, what do you consider the key requirements on forest data to safeguard informed policymaking, which is more or less the overarching topic of our panel here today? So if you have maybe one or two thoughts on this, I would be grateful. You're still
all right, now it's on. Yeah, I would start at the same point as the previous panelists, and that is that the regular collection of relevant data on the current state and development of our forests should provide us as policymakers with the information we need as a basis for policy making, of course, and policy development, but also for the public debate on forests. Because particularly in the past years, in Germany, especially also because of the damages to our forests, to climate change, forests have really come to the center of attention, not only in politics, but also in the media and society at large. And therefore, more than ever, we require a solid and a reliable information base, because we need to be able to answer questions like, what kind of forest do we need in the future? You know, in the face of climate change and biodiversity losses and all the other challenges we are facing. And in addition, of course, we need to fulfill our international reporting requirements. Now, in general terms, from the perspective of a policymaker, as a general principle, information should be clear, it should be true, correct, and it should be understandable. It's also important that it can be safely collected and that it can be reproduced. The contents and the methods must be easy to understand, and they also must be easy to communicate. And because only if data is thoroughly understood can we assess and judge what it actually means, how important it is, and also its resilience and its limitations. And finally, data should be collected efficiently, and it should really provide us with the information that we need as policymakers. A few things in particular concerns, for example, the consistency of methods, which is essential as a prerequisite for being able to detect and interpret changes. Because methodological changes always carry risks of misinformation and artifacts, but on the other hand, we also need to be able to adapt our data to new needs, new information needs. So it also doesn't help us if for 20, 30 years, we always collect the same type of data without ever changing, adding anything. So that will necessarily mean that we will have methodological changes. And I think Ansi can tell that story quite well from the Global Forest Resources Assessment. We have now a lot of good modern information tools like remote sensing, and that really open up many, many new possibilities in terms of large scale application and also temporal repetition rate. But depending on the objectives and the required detail, the use of such tools should be complemented by data collection on the ground. But there again, you know, it's always a question of efficiency, how much you do of what, and it's also a question of cost. For example, in Germany, we have very good infrastructure and easy accessibility of forests, but this may not be the case in other countries. Okay, I'll leave it there.
What I get from here, one among other arguments, is also the future use of data that are sometimes very complex, also to how to communicate this. I think this is a pre-requirement for policymakers, and not just to end up with the final message. Everything is very complicated, which is not very satisfying then for the audience. So I think this is a very important issue alongside with the consistency, of course, and I think this is where a lot of experts are working. But then it's really how to step over the horse to get this communicated in a way that people understand this. I think this is a key issue. So I thank you also for this message. Tula, so now up to you. It's very nice to look at you through this hole or whatever this is, into the universe of Tula. So it looks very good. So I would like to ask you what are the major efforts of Finnish forest policy towards strengthening forest data provision and uptake. So again, also this focus on uptake, not only provision, but also how to take it up.
Thank you, Bernhard. If you wonder the choice of my background image, it is because the government prevents us from loading Zoom program. So we are joining via web browser, and this was the only background image I could fit in. But that for the government decisions. Finland has financed NFI to be carried out since 1921. That is 100 years this year. The long time series and, for example, the estimates of maximum sustained yield have been very important for the Finnish society and Finnish national economy. And for strategic planning, we have a series of national forest programs since 1960s, prepared based on a full national coverage of NFI data and projections of future forest resources. And these results have always been public, and for decades now also in open access reporting systems available. We appreciate the value of primary data in resource inventory, in monitoring state and changes over time, and also for knowledge generation and modeling purposes. And in Finland, the NFI measurements in the field have been developed over the years, reflecting the changing and growing information needs in the society. The most recent development is Operation Blueberry. Maybe you have heard of it. It focuses on forest and peatland vegetation. So we invest a lot also in the development of NFIs. In recent years, and along the lines stated in the most recent national strategy, the government has invested a lot also on wall-to-wall mapping based on the integration of remote sensing and field measurements, both in the context of NFI and for tactical and operational forest information systems. For the latter, we have more frequent LiDAR cycles over country. We have real-time update after operations in the forest and open access to forest map data. And in addition, for the uptake of data, we have also developed standards for data transfer to support interoperability of different information systems and data sharing and data interchange. That's for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuula, for your insights. I think one idea for the future could really be that also countries more frequently demonstrate this best practices in the approaches towards forest data, but also other issues in relation to sustainable forest management. I think this is very good because maybe it's so that it's not everything is well known, and this would really help avoid also misunderstandings, or also improve the clarity of activities that are ongoing. So I think this was very helpful as an insight or as an example also what could be done also in the future. So thanks a lot. We, in the meantime, have a few questions where I have to handle now two different fields, because we have the question and answers and we have the chat, and I followed this, and we had, and Claudia, you were aware of that already, that Ruben Valbuena asked a question to you about funding of a common European forest information system. So this was the first question I was aware of, and if there are opportunities for a tender or something like this, maybe you can just directly respond to that.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying with one eye like a chameleon, finding the chat and the questions and answers. There are two questions on money, so I will take them both at the same time. On what did we pay? My colleagues in JRC would be better placed than me, because they were our interlocutors with the NFIs for the FISA. But basically, we probably paid for both things. We probably paid a fee that included data, and that included the effort by colleagues in NFIs to package that data for us. So probably when you ask where you're paying for a bit of also the data expert packaging, yes, probably there was a part of that, but there was certainly a part of just paying for the data itself. So probably the fee included both things. In terms of who would be paying the monitoring system, which I think the colleague Ruben Valbuena was saying will be probably at the heart of this. In the past, it was a joint venture. I'm not saying this is, I'm not equipped, and certainly no decision has been taken on the funding of any of this, but in the past it was a joint venture. We put 65 million, sorry, and member states were putting a co-sharing of this, no? Co-funding of this. And necessarily, I think there will need to be also a share from member states, since they are the biggest beneficiary also of such a monitoring system. And then if there will be EU funds for this, I am in no position to, that would be decided when the law will come, and whether there would be a budget for this. But it was in the past a joint venture of both parties, because both parties have a strong interest in co-funding this kind of EU monitoring system.
Okay, it seems that there are quite some questions about the money, as always. Yeah. So I also, then when I move into the chat, there's also a question by Vivian about, I think it was also related to, I cannot read who wrote this, about the question of provision of NFI data and also the preparation of the data. So that it's not only that they're sort of freely available, but they need to be processed and then provided, and this might relate to the costs. Is this something you might, I think it's also addressed to you, Claudia, because you raised this also, that, you know, giving public money for data that are paid by public money.
Yeah, I just replied to this. I said it was the GRC for us that we're doing this interlocutor, being the interlocutor for the NFIs and buying the data. So as I said, it was probably in the fee we paid. We were paying for both things, for the data itself, just for the data itself, and probably for some packaging effort that the NFIs had to do for us to ship it to us, no? So probably both things were included in the price, and my colleagues would be better placed. But for sure, what I can tell you is that the fees we paid included payment just for the data.
So I think this is a very important issue to put on the agenda for future discussions, how to solve this issue, because I think in the end nobody is served if this is the sort of lock towards a more consistent information in the end. So I have a question here now from Stefan Fleck. So it's not addressed to anybody specific. So how do you see the role of risk assessment of the future development of forest production potential under climate change and other pressures? I don't know who feels competent here to answer this. Any volunteers?
Maybe just a few words from the policymakers' perspective. I think it is important. I mean, if I look at Germany right now, our forest owners and also we as policymakers are faced with a lot of decisions that have to be taken regarding the future of our forests, because we have almost 300,000 hectares of forests that have been destroyed by extreme weather events and insect attacks, and that have to be reforested. And the big question is, so how do we do that? What species do we use? What mixtures do we use? Can we still plant conifers, or does it always have to be hardwoods in the future? And I think it would be very important for us to have analysis done on what the possible impact would be on different scenarios and different choices we might make, and what that would mean for forest production in the future. And also, there's a lot of people now who say we shouldn't continue to harvest that much timber. We should leave more forests alone and use them for protection rather than timber production. So what will that mean in terms of forest production in the future? Where will our timber come from, and so on? There's a whole series of questions that need to be answered, and it would be really good to have some analysis done on these issues.
So thanks a lot. I see Tula has also requested the floor.
Yes, thank you. I think this was the most interesting question that was proposed today, at least for me. So I definitely think risk management, risk assessment and risk management is very important, both at the national, tactical and operational level. And at national level, we should also address risks caused by policy decisions. We all know that climate change have impact and is causing increasing risks for forest damages, for example, storms, fires, etc. But for example, in Finland, we have followed very concerned about the discussion against regeneration fellings. Because that may cause that we cannot regenerate areas where we would in normal cycle, natural cycle, have open stage forest, and that may cause that we have shadow tree species on two dry sites, and they may really be affected by damages. And so therefore, I think that these direct and indirect risks needs to be addressed at national level, and also landowners need more information on the risks caused by environment and also risks that are linked with management operations. Thank you.
I think the risk question, this will accompany us now in this next years. So, and I think this will also be a strong effort in the Forest Europe activities. And this is also strongly related to information and data. I think a very good success of this discussion, and that we really need to have a quick focus on also how to assess risks with the best available data. So I see no other questions. So I think it's been an intense day. If there's nothing else and nobody raises their hand, so I would give back to Helga, I suppose. Thank you very much, dear panelists, for your participation. I think it was a great discussion, also a very compact one. So no big talking around issues, but really with a very strong focus. And I'm very grateful for that. And yeah, thank you very much, and I give back to Helga now.
Thanks, everyone. Nice seeing you.
Dear panelists, thank you for this great discussion on forest data. And now, Robert and me, we would like to give some concluding remarks about this fantastic day. But I think Robert would want to start, and I will compliment him.
Yeah, you know that we are conservative as foresters. We always go in the order that we were speaking, so we will not try to now summarize all of the presentations, but maybe when we look back in the morning session, it was more highlighting the experts, their work and their views on the question of forest monitoring in Europe. The current situation is that there have never been so many and so much data compiled by different actors with different tools. There are no new tools that are becoming available. So the time is ripe actually to establish a monitoring system that will be able to represent the diversity of European forests, look at their multifunctionality, and be able also to replicate information about the multifunctionality. However, this will certainly need a big effort on one side in granting access to data, to create this data in a transparent mode, to try to harmonize and standardize certain data, and then also to bridge the gaps that obviously sometimes exist between different communities that both work in the same direction, but maybe very often in parallel. And I think that Helga will also a little bit reflect later on this. One very, very important element here that was also mentioned several times in the morning about interpreting the data and providing the key messages, telling a story to our users, to our audiences, to understand the needs of these audiences, and to make sure that whatever we provide to them in these stories it's also reliable, that they can rely and they can fully take it into account when taking decisions or when interpreting the situation. So with this, I would then hand over to Helga.
Thank you, Robert. I think what we have learned today is definitely that the data collection is important, despite the fact that it's a huge effort to collect these data. And we have also learned that cooperation and coordination is important between those that collect data on different levels of decision making. In the afternoon, we have heard that it is important to identify the targets in the policy instruments that need these monitoring data to be able to see whether the objectives have actually been reached. But it needs to, the concept of sustainable forest management is not necessarily static, but dynamic, because the data collection is constantly updated, and also the requirement for new data is also constantly updated through different policy objectives that come along. But I think what we have also learned this afternoon, especially in the panel discussion, that the timeliness of data collection is important, and to be able to make evidence-based decisions, sometimes also more frequent updates are important. So integration between remote sensing data and NFIs that were said to be the backbones of data collection need to be done. And I think what Robert and Bernhard have also summarized so well, that access is needed to NFI data, not only from a science-based perspective, but also for other purposes. And but the problem is that it seems we need to have specific expertise to understand this NFI data. My final words would actually go to this fact that classical data, they will also be needed in the future, as we heard from Eva Müller. And therefore, this continuous collection of specific data that have been collected also in the past would need to be done in the future as well, while additional information that is needed needs to be covered by new data collection methods. But adding new methods is, of course, difficult and not easy. But I think the challenge should be taken up to do that, especially to also fill up data gaps. With this, I would like to thank all the presenters of the whole day and all the panelists for this great day. I really enjoyed it, and we would now go all for a drink, but unfortunately this is not possible, so I have to ask you in your countries to go to the fridge or maybe later on to a restaurant and have a drink, and a very enjoyable afternoon or evening, depending on the time zone that you're in. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you very soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you also from my side. And now, if I could say, we cannot go for a drink, but I would invite all the speakers and panelists that are still here with us, if you can just for a moment switch on your camera so that everybody can still once see you who actually delivered this exciting and interesting debate and presentations. And I think that our colleagues here will also be able to take a photo of all of you that we can then later also use in our communication efforts. So excellent to see that still everybody is smiling. So nobody leaves these debates and this discussion with bad or hard feelings. So thank you very much, everyone, and it was a real pleasure having you here with us today. Have a good afternoon and evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.